Welcome to the Funeral Channel Network podcast, and specifically to today's deep dive. Imagine, if you will, standing right in the middle of a cemetery.
Oh, yeah, we've all been there. It's usually a, quiet afternoon, maybe a little overcast.
Exactly. And look around you. You are completely surrounded by absolute permanence, right?
Right. I mean, granite, marble, bronze. We carve names deeply into stone that's literally designed specifically to withstand centuries of wind and rain.
We do everything in our power to make the memory of the dead permanent. Yet, right there, resting against that immovable, immortal stone, we insist on placing fragile, delicate, dying plants.
Cut flowers, yeah.
Yeah.
Flowers that we know will wilt, turn brown, and basically blow away in a matter of days.
Right. So why do we honor the permanent dead with things that are, literally in the process of withering?
It is a profound paradox, isn't it?
Mm.
I mean, on the surface, it makes almost no logical sense whatsoever.
No, it doesn't.
Like, if you were an alien observing Earth from afar, you would just think it was a terrible mismatch of materials.
Exactly. It's completely counterintuitive. And that is what we are unpacking today. For you listening as a learner, we really want to invite you into a shared mental exercise.
Yeah, because we all know the drill, right? Someone passes away, you go to the florist, you buy a wreath or a bouquet.
But today, our mission is to strip away the familiarity of that habit. We are looking at a really fascinating source guide today. It's a comprehensive look at the history, the psychology, and the emotional mechanics behind placing flowers on graves.
And the goal here is to help families understand how this tradition is far more than just a polite social obligation. It's actually a highly sophisticated mechanism that fosters comfort and maintains personal bonds after a loss.
It's so true. So to understand why we bring flowers to graves today, we have to look back at the very first people who did it.
And what's fascinating here is that this is not a modern invention at all.
Right. We aren't talking about like Victorian etiquette or something dreamed up by greeting card companies in the 1920s.
Not even close. To truly understand why we are compelled to leave flowers at a gravesite today, we have to recognize that this is an unbroken chain of human behavior stretching back to the absolute dawn of our species.
Okay, let's unpack this. Because when you say the dawn of our species, I don't think people realize just how far back you mean. We aren't talking about the ancient Egyptians or the Romans, right? We are going back way further.
Oh, way, way further. We're talking about the Paleolithic era.
Wow.
Yeah, one of the most famous archaeological discoveries regarding this comes from the Shanidar Cave in modern-day Iraq. We are talking about Neanderthal burials dating back roughly 60,000 to 70,000 years.
60,000 years. I mean, just let that sink in for a second.
Right. And when archaeologists excavated these graves, they took soil samples from around the remains. And what they found completely altered our understanding of early hominids.
What was it?
The soil was saturated with clusters of pollen. And not just random pollen blown in by the wind either.
So it was intentional.
Yes, they found concentrated amounts of pollen from very specific brightly colored wildflowers. Things like yarrow, cornflowers, St. Barnaby's thistle, grape hyacinths.
But let me push back on that for a second, just to be the skeptic here. If we are talking about ancient humans,
Sure.
people who are constantly on the brink of starvation, fighting the elements, just trying to survive the Pleistocene, right? Couldn't this just be practical?
What do you mean?
Like, could the flowers have been placed there just to mask the scent of decay?
It's a completely fair question, and for a long time that was actually a prevailing theory among more cynical anthropologists.
Right, because it makes logical sense.
It does. But the botanical evidence tells a different story. The specific plants found in the Shanidar Cave are known for their medicinal properties, and more importantly, they are incredibly vibrant, blooming plants.
Okay, so they stand out.
Exactly. They had to be actively foraged, often from distant locations, and brought into the cave. This requires a massive expenditure of caloric energy.
Oh, I see.
Yet in a survival situation, you do not expend precious energy gathering brightly colored hyacinths just for odor control. You use whatever is closest: dirt, rocks, generic brush.
Ah, so the specific choice of the flower implies some kind of cognitive leap.
Precisely. It applies intentionality and symbolic thought. Put yourself in the mind of an early human. You do not have an understanding of cellular biology, right?
Definitely not.
You don't have religious texts explaining the afterlife.
Oh.
You were simply confronted with the terrifying absolute finality of a body that was moving yesterday and is suddenly still today.
Which has to be traumatizing.
Beyond traumatizing. So how do you process that trauma? You look to the environment around you for clues about how existence operates.
And what's the most obvious clue? The changing of the seasons, right?
Exactly. The environment goes through this brutal cycle. Winter comes and the world appears to die.
Yeah, the landscape freezes, the trees are stripped bare, everything turns gray and brown.
But then, almost miraculously, to the early human mind, the ground thaws. And pushing its way up through the dead, frozen earth is a fragile, intensely vibrant flower.
It's almost like early humans invented a form of emotional technology. They lacked the vocabulary to articulate the terror of death, so they grabbed the most potent visual metaphor the earth had to offer.
I love that phrase, emotional technology, because the flower served a profound functional purpose for their mental survival.
Right.
When an ancient family laid yarrow or cornflowers over their dead, they weren't just decorating, they were making a desperate, hopeful psychological connection.
A connection to the natural world.
Yes, they were observing that nature has a cycle, that what appears dead can return to the earth and produce new life.
I mean, I see the logic in that ancient cycle, but realistically, when someone is standing at a grave today, they aren't thinking about agricultural cycles.
No, of course not.
They aren't thinking about the Pleistocene era. So my question is, has this tradition just become a hollow habit we buy at the grocery store, or is that subconscious comfort still actively working in our brains?
That is the million-dollar question, isn't it? I would argue that it's still very much active, even if it operates entirely below our conscious awareness.
How so?
Well, when you experience a devastating loss, your personal universe feels chaotic. The rules of your life have been shattered. You feel entirely out of control.
Yeah, that makes sense. Everything feels upended.
Exactly. So when you bring a flower to a grave, even a modern cellophane-wrapped bouquet from a supermarket, you are anchoring yourself to the oldest, most reliable pattern on the planet.
You're visually reminding your grieving brain that existence has an order to it.
Yes. Things sprout, they bloom, they fade, and they return to the earth. It transforms the grave from a terrifying abrupt endpoint into a resting phase within a much larger continuous system.
Wow.
It literally lowers the cognitive dissonance of death.
That makes incredible sense. So we start with this broad, universal emotional technology of the life cycle. But as societies evolve, as human culture gets more complex, the tradition doesn't just stay a generic bundle of wildflowers.
No, it becomes much more intricate.
Right. Looking at the research compiled for this deep dive, the practice fragments into something highly specific. We move from the broad concept of life to an intricate, silent language of emotional symbolism.
This is where we see the transition from the functional to the deeply expressive.
Right.
Over thousands of years, as our capacity for language and nuanced emotion grew, so did our demands on the symbols we used. A generic flower just wasn't enough anymore. Humans needed specific tools to express specific types of pain.
Here's where it gets really interesting. Think about the last time you, the listener, had to buy flowers for a funeral. Think about the overwhelming paralysis of standing in the florist's aisle.
Oh, it's awful.
You are grieving, your brain is foggy, and someone asks you, what do you want to say to the family? Or what do you want to say to the person who passed? And you just freeze.
Because grief literally attacks the language centers of the brain. Trauma can shut down Broca's area, which is responsible for speech production.
Wait, really? It physically shuts it down.
Yes, physically. When you are in the acute phase of loss, you're experiencing emotions that are too massive, too dense, and too raw for a standard English vocabulary. Words feel entirely inadequate.
So this floral vocabulary, what the Victorians used to call floriography, but which exists across almost all human cultures, steps in to do the heavy lifting.
Exactly. When you can't speak, the flower speaks for you.
The materials we are referencing today highlight three very distinct examples of this silent language. Roses, lilies, and carnations. And I want to dig into why these specific flowers carry these specific meanings, because I doubt it's just random.
It's definitely not random.
Let's start with the rose. Our materials state universally that roses represent love.
Right. But let's look at the actual mechanism of why. Think about the botanical architecture of a rose.
Okay, the architecture.
Yeah, it is incredibly complex. It has layers upon layers of tightly wound petals. It takes time to unfurl. This perfectly mirrors the complexity of deep human attachment.
Yeah.
True love isn't simple, it's layered.
And the color, obviously. like a red rose.
The deep, vibrant red of a traditional funeral rose is the color of arterial blood, of the beating heart. It signifies a life force. But even more critically, and this is something often overlooked, roses have thorns.
Oh, wow. I never thought about that in the context of a funeral.
Right, from a psychological standpoint, laying a rose on a grave is a subconscious acknowledgement of a fundamental human truth.
Which is what?
To love someone deeply is to open yourself up to the profound pain of losing them. The beauty of the bloom and the sharpness of the thorn are inseparable.
That is incredibly poetic.
So when a spouse or a child places a single red rose on a casket, they aren't just saying a generic, I love you. They are speaking a complex emotional sentence.
They are saying our attachment was deep, it was vibrant, and the severing of our bond is agonizing.
Exactly. It expresses the totality of the romantic or familial bond.
That is so much heavier than just red means love. But then we look at the lily. If the rose is this heavy, passionate, almost painful expression of attachment, the lily is completely different. The research points out that lilies symbolize peace. Why the lily?
Contrast the physical reality of the lily with the rose.
Yeah.
The lily doesn't have those dense, tightly wound layers. It is an open, sweeping, almost trumpeting shape.
Yeah, it's very open.
It is visually expansive. Furthermore, traditional funeral lilies are stark, pure white.
Which usually symbolizes purity, right?
Purity, yes, but in the context of grief, white represents a clearing, a void, a clean slate.
A clean slate. Interesting.
If you look at the historical context, especially in Renaissance religious art, the white lily frequently appears in scenes like the Annunciation. Over centuries, it became deeply ingrained in the cultural subconscious as a symbol of the soul's restoration to a state of grace or innocence.
So if I am choosing a lily for a funeral, what is the specific psychological need I am fulfilling?
You are tapping into a completely different frequency of grief than the rose. You might be mourning someone who suffered a long illness or someone whose life was chaotic and difficult.
Right, somebody really struggled.
In that moment, your primary desperate need is not to declare your passion. It is to secure their tranquility. By choosing the lily, the grieving mind takes the chaotic, internal desire for the deceased's suffering to end and projects it outward onto a physical object.
The lily becomes a proxy for peace. You lay it down, and visually, its sweeping white petals communicate a release of tension.
Yes, beautifully put.
That makes perfect sense. It's almost like the physical act of choosing the flower is a form of cognitive behavioral therapy.
Oh, absolutely.
It's like a psychological sorting algorithm. You have this massive, tangled knot of grief in your chest. By forcing yourself to stand there and decide, do I need the rose or do I need the lily? You are actively untangling the knot. You are forcing your brain to categorize the trauma.
That is a phenomenal analogy.
All right.
Yes. The tradition acts as a sorting algorithm for trauma. You are pulling the paralyzing, invisible weight of grief out of your body, translating it into a physical object, and then you are able to literally set it down on the grave and step back.
It's an incredible release valve for the human psyche.
It really is.
Which brings us to the third flower mentioned in our analysis today, the carnation. Our notes say carnations symbolize remembrance. If the rose is love and the lily is peace, where does the carnation fit into this sorting algorithm?
Think about the other primary fear in grief. It's not just the pain of loss, and it's not just the hope for the person's peace. There is an absolute terrifying dread of forgetting.
Oh, yeah. That's a huge fear for so many families.
We are terrified that as time passes, the memory of the person will fade, their voice will slip from our minds, and they will be erased.
The fear of being forgotten is huge. So how does the carnation address that?
Through its botanical properties. The Dianthus caryophyllus, the carnation, is renowned for its hardiness. Once you cut a delicate flower, like a tulip or certain types of lilies, they begin to droop almost immediately.
Right, they're highly sensitive to their environment.
But a carnation, however, is notoriously stubborn. It can last for weeks after being cut. It resists rot. It holds its structure.
Ah, so the flower itself is physically demonstrating endurance.
Exactly. When a family chooses a carnation, they are combating the anxiety of erasure. They are laying down a symbol of resilience.
So the silent language here translates to, my memory of you is sturdy. It will not wilt under the pressure of time. I will not forget you.
That's exactly it.
So when we look at the floral spread at a modern funeral, we aren't just looking at pretty decorations. We are looking at a highly articulate, three-dimensional tapestry of psychological coping mechanisms.
That's the perfect way to phrase it.
The rose is handling the pain of attachment,
Yeah.
the lily is managing the hope for spiritual transition, and the carnation is battling the existential dread of forgetting.
Which is why this tradition has survived for thousands of years. It works. It gives the grieving mind exactly what it needs when language fails.
But the profound reality of grief is that the funeral is just the starting line, isn't it?
Oh, absolutely. The funeral's just day one.
Right, the initial shock fades, the casseroles stop coming, people go back to work, and you are left with the massive, daunting task of figuring out how to live the rest of your life with this person entirely absent from it.
Which is incredibly hard.
And this is where our research takes a fascinating turn. It shifts from the funeral itself to how we use flowers to maintain the bond afterward. The materials specifically mention the practice of placing flowers during special occasions, anniversaries, birthdays, and holidays, ensuring loved ones are actively remembered.
If we connect this to the bigger picture of modern psychology, this is perhaps the most crucial part of our deep dive. For a very long time throughout the 20th century, the dominant psychological framework for grief was heavily influenced by Freudian ideas.
Oh, Freud.
Yeah, the concept was called grief work, and the ultimate goal was essentially severance.
Right, the idea of closure. I've always hated that word. It implies you just shut a door and walk away.
And you hate it because intuitively, you know it's biologically and psychologically flawed.
Yeah, it feels wrong.
The old model dictated that to successfully mourn, you had to detach your emotional energy from the deceased and reinvest it entirely into new relationships in the present. If you continued to hold on, you were considered to be in a state of pathological melancholia.
You were basically failing at grieving.
Exactly. You were diagnosed as failing to adapt.
That sounds incredibly harsh and clinical.
It was very clinical. But in the late 1990s, researchers like Phyllis Silverman and Dennis Klass revolutionized the field by formalizing a concept known as continuing bonds.
Continuing bonds.
Yes, they looked at how human beings actually behave, globally and cross-culturally, and realized that healthy grief is not about severing the tie. It is about transforming the tie.
How so?
Well, the person is no longer physically walking through the door, but your relationship with them has not ended. You still love them. You still consult them in your mind when making decisions. You still dream about them.
So the relationship shifts from a physical reality to an internal psychological reality.
Precisely. The goal of mourning is not to achieve closure. It is to figure out how to integrate the deceased into your ongoing life in a healthy way. And this brings us right back to the tradition of visiting the grave with flowers on specific dates.
So what does this all mean in practice? Let's take birthdays and holidays. Why are these specific calendar dates so agonizing for families?
Because they are cultural markers of time and gathering. A random Tuesday in March might be manageable because there is no societal expectation attached to it, but Thanksgiving, Christmas, a birthday.
Right.
These days are structurally designed around the presence of loved ones. So when someone is missing, their absence becomes the loudest, most suffocating thing in the room. It is the empty chair phenomenon.
You feel like you are moving forward in time but leaving them behind in the past.
Yes. The cognitive dissonance is deafening. So how does a family cope? If they ignore the empty chair, the anxiety builds. The day is ruined by what isn't being said.
But if they engage in the tradition of bringing flowers to the grave on that exact morning,
What are they doing? They are taking physical action. They are asserting agency over their grief.
they are tending to the relationship in the present tense.
Exactly. They go to the florist. They use that sorting algorithm we talked about, choosing the carnations for enduring memory, or maybe the deceased's favorite yellow tulips. They make the physical journey to the cemetery. They arrange the flowers. This is an active psychological intervention.
This raises an important question about how we define presence. Because obviously the loved one isn't sitting at the holiday table.
Right. Physically, they aren't there.
But by carving out time on a busy holiday morning to go to the cemetery and lay down fresh flowers, isn't the family essentially sending an invitation? Aren't they saying, we recognize you aren't physically here, but we are actively integrating your memory into today's celebration?
That is exactly what is happening. By placing the flowers, they are stating unequivocally, your timeline has not stopped in our family narrative. You are still a participant in this family's story.
Wow.
It is an act of inclusion that bridges the gap between the living and the dead.
It's a refusal to let the march of time erase them. And honestly, it sounds incredibly healthy. It gives you a task to perform when you would otherwise just be drowning in the passive feeling of missing them.
It is incredibly healthy. The physical ritual of tending to the graves mirrors the emotional work of tending to the internal bond. And the flowers, with their vibrant colors, act as a visual anchor.
You leave the cemetery knowing you have actively communicated your ongoing love, which makes the rest of the holiday infinitely more bearable.
Exactly.
Now, this brings us to a fascinating evolution in material culture that our research notes today. We have spent this deep dive talking about the ancient use of fresh flowers representing the fleeting cycle of life and the specific emotional language of blooms.
Right.
But as we transition into how families are handling this today, the documentation points out a really critical shift. It highlights that today, families are using both fresh and artificial flowers, but more importantly, they are incorporating personalized memorial items right alongside them.
This is a huge trend right now.
It's interesting looking at our source materials because they specifically reference platforms like the funeral program site as a hub for these modern personalized products. And they emphasize it as the only recommended resource for these. This points to a massive modern shift.
It really does. And this is a profound shift in the psychological mechanics of the tradition. Let's analyze this evolution. For thousands of years, as we discussed with the Shannon Arcage, the entire power of the flower rested in its ephemeral nature.
Right, it didn't last.
It was natural. It was subject to the immutable laws of biology. It bloomed and it died. That temporary status was the whole point of the metaphor. It forced the grieving person to accept the cycle of existence.
Great, you place the fresh flower knowing it will be gone in a week, just as human life is temporary.
But human desires are deeply complex and often contradictory. While part of our brain recognizes the profound wisdom in accepting the cycle of life, another very stubborn part of our brain possesses a desperate, ingrained desire for permanence.
We do not want to accept that things end.
No, we don't.
Yes.
We want our love to last forever. We want the impact of our loved one to be immortalized.
So we start rebelling against the natural cycle.
Precisely. The introduction of artificial flowers, and especially the inclusion of highly personalized, weather-resistant memorial items, represents a human rebellion against the decay of time.
Interesting.
It is our attempt to impose permanence onto a landscape that is entirely defined by loss and the passage of time.
This is such a fascinating tension. On one hand, you have the fresh lilies or roses. They connect you to the universal human experience. They say, I am a human being participating in the ancient natural cycle of grief, just like the Neanderthals, just like the Victorians.
But the personalized memorial item, a custom plaque, an engraved marker, a beautifully designed weatherproof photograph from a place like the funeral program site that serves a completely different master.
Exactly. The fresh flower is universal. A rose means love for everyone. But your grief isn't universal. Your grief is agonizingly specific.
Right.
You didn't just lose a mother, you lost your mother. She had a specific laugh, a specific way of looking at the world, a specific name.
Yes. You don't want her legacy to just be a generic symbol that blends into the grass of the cemetery. You want to stake a claim on the earth that says, this exact specific person existed and they mattered.
And from a psychological standpoint, this combined approach, the natural flowers alongside the manufactured, personalized memorial, creates a much more comprehensive and emotionally satisfying tribute. Think about the dual needs of the grieving mind when visiting a grave months or years later.
Okay, walk me through that. What are those dual needs?
Well, the first need is to feel connected to the broader scope of humanity. When you stand in a cemetery surrounded by thousands of graves, the fresh flowers you bring visually link your plot to the others.
It provides the comfort of knowing you are not alone. You are participating in the shared human condition. That is the macro-level comfort.
Exactly. And the second need is the micro-level validation, the fierce need to validate the unique identity of the person buried there.
Ah, I see.
When a family places a beautifully customized memorial item, perhaps something featuring a specific poem, a photograph, or custom artwork that perfectly encapsulates the deceased's personality from the funeral program site, they are aggressively celebrating individuality against the backdrop of universal mortality.
So by blending the two, you satisfy both sides of the brain. The flowers say, we belong to the eternal cycle of nature. The personalized item says, but this specific individual will never, ever be forgotten.
Yes. It anchors the fleeting, delicate beauty of the flowers to the permanent, hard reality of their specific legacy.
It creates a perfect synthesis. And it shows that while our technology and our material culture change, from forging wild yarrow 60,000 years ago to cultivating complex hybrid roses to ordering intricately personalized memorials online, the underlying human heartbeat of the tradition remains entirely unchanged.
We are still just human beings, standing at the edge of the great unknown.
Using the physical objects around us to try and express an invisible, enduring love.
It really makes you look at a cemetery completely differently. It's not just a field of stone and dead grass.
No, it transforms it entirely. A cemetery is not a landscape of passive sorrow. It is a landscape of active, ongoing conversations.
Every single bouquet of lilies, every red rose, every weatherproof photograph, every personalized marker is a sentence in a dialogue between the living and the dead.
It's a dialogue that we simply refuse to let end.
So as we wrap up this deep dive, let's just trace the incredible journey we've been on. We started tens of thousands of years ago in the Shanidar cave, with early humans reaching for the very first emotional technology.
Right, using the biological blooming and fading of wildflowers to process the terrifying, awe-inspiring cycle of life, and finding the first glimmers of spiritual comfort in the promise of spring.
Then we explored how that raw survival instinct evolved into a highly sophisticated, silent emotional vocabulary. We saw how the sheer paralysis of trauma necessitated a visual language, where the biological complexity and thorns of a rose express the pain of deep attachment.
And the sleeping purity of a lily manages the hope for spiritual peace, while the stubborn hardiness of a carnation battles our existential dread of forgetting.
We shattered the old clinical idea of moving on and looked at how this tradition is an active mechanism for survival, how bringing those specific flowers on birthdays and holidays acts as a crucial psychological bridge, a way to practice continuing bonds and actively invite our past loved ones back into the present-day narrative of the family.
And finally, we analyze the modern elevation of the tribute, how the tension between the ephemeral beauty of natural flowers and the enduring permanence of personalized items allows families to create a complete memorial.
One that honors the universal, unavoidable cycle of nature, while firmly planting an unyielding flag for the unique, irreplaceable identity of the individual they lost.
It's just staggering when you really look at it, the sheer weight of human emotion carried by a few petals.
It is the ultimate testament to human resilience and our capacity for love. And to you, the listener, we hope this shifts your perspective. The next time you drive past a cemetery and see those bright splashes of color against the gray granite, or the next time you find yourself standing in a florist shop feeling overwhelmed as you decide which bouquet to bring to a loved one's resting place.
We want you to remember this exploration. You aren't just following some dusty societal etiquette rule. You're actively participating in a profound, incredibly vital human instinct. You are reaching across the veil to communicate love, to seek peace, and to build a bridge between worlds.
And as we leave you today, I want to offer one final thought to ponder. We've talked so much about the contrast between the ancient and the modern, the temporary and the permanent. If ancient fresh flowers represent the fleeting cycle of existence, the absolute necessity of accepting that all things must eventually pass, and our modern, personalized memorial items represent our deep, rebellious desire for permanence and lasting memory,
Does the modern grave beautifully capture the ultimate human tension?
is standing there, placing a dying flower next to an engraved permanent stone, the ultimate agonizing expression of our need to accept letting go, combined with our desperate, beautiful desire to hold on forever. Keep questioning the why behind the everyday things around you. We'll catch you on the next deep dive.